Welcome back. Today we got this little pad foot packer in the shop, and the customer's complaint is, well, it doesn't go. So like anything else, I asked him, what did it happen all of a sudden, or did it develop over time? And he's like, what are you, a little slow? I just told you, it doesn't go. So let's see if we can make it go. He was right. It doesn't go. Let me get a battery charger. Maybe now it'll go. Still doesn't go. Now I'm going to be the first to admit that I don't know a lot about this little thing. It's got a little Hatz single-cylinder diesel engine in it. I don't know a lot about Hatz. I've worked on a few of them in my career, but very minor repairs to them. Oil leaks, services, stuff like that. You got this little decompression lever here. Let's try decompressing it. So I'm going to push that up. Give it a go. Wow. There's something wrong there. This decompression lever, like any decompression lever, is going to lower the compression on the compression stroke to make it easier for it to crank. Some of them just hold an exhaust valve open and you get the engine cranking, and then you let it go, the exhaust valve's closed, and the engine hopefully will fire up. This style here is supposed to push all the way up, and then each stroke of the piston, there's a little ratchet system in there that is supposed to ratchet down and somewhere fire up on its own. So it's kind of like an automatic decompression lever. And that's not working. So I think we got something mechanical going on inside of there. So I think right now we'll get rid of these protective covers, pull off the valve cover, and have a look inside. Well, I see how it goes. As soon as there's heavy lifting involved, you guys aren't around anymore. Let's get this valve cover off. So here we have our intake valve, and right here's our exhaust valve. And the decompression lever, which we looked at earlier. If I notice that clearance in the exhaust valve is quite high, if I move the decompression lever up, no exhaust valve clearance. So this decompression lever actually simulates a longer duration on the camshaft. So the exhaust valve is going to be open later in the scavenging and into the intake stroke. And if the exhaust valve is open at the same time the intake valve is open and the piston is going down, we're going to get less air into the cylinder. Less air means it's going to be easier for the engine to compress that air. Hence, a lower compression ratio. As the engine cranks over, every time the cam shaft lifts up the exhaust valve, this should move the decompression pawl, I guess we'll call it, on the decompression cam, and the engine will cycle over once, and it'll click down, cycle over again, click down, so that's about 2 cranks of the engine. Very slight amount of exhaust valve clearance. Another click down, more, and somewhere in here the engine should fire up and run. Decompression lever off, we're back to our natural engine state. So right now, when I push this up, it should be about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cranks of the engine, and this should be, the lever should be fully off. Let's give it a go and see, watch what happens. So the cam pushed down once, but it didn't quite push far enough to get to the next pawl. I'm going to lower this back down. Now, intake clearance, exhaust clearance. I don't have any literature on this engine, and I'm not too sure what the valve clearance on this engine should be. So I'll have to revert back to my old days of being a diesel push mower mechanic and go with some of my experience then, and well, that was actually zero experience. So I'm just going to guess that this little 670cc diesel, that seems like a whole bunch of exhaust valve clearance and intake clearance. Way too much. So I'm thinking this engine has a few hours on it. I have no idea how many. But I'm thinking why the decompression lever isn't working is the valve clearance is too loose, which means the cam travel is not enough to cause the pawls to engage. Would that stop our engine from starting? Maybe. It might, but it should want to try to fire, I would think, or at least smoke. And we don't even have any smoke here. So this definitely is a problem. I might have to tighten up this exhaust valve clearance. I don't know, I'll guess a number that seems like it should be okay and see if that works better. But there's no smoke coming out of the exhaust, so I'm thinking we have more problems yet. Now, doing it that way was a no-no. It's definitely not a very good valve set. I don't even know at what rotation or where this engine in its rotation of its strokes it's sitting at right now. I do know both valves were closed, and I didn't use a feeler gauge. I don't have any specs. I'm just going off of my limited experience of zero to get these somewhere close. I just want to see if that was the problem with our decompression lever. So let's give it a whirl again. I'm going to set the lever and we're going to crank it over and see what happens. Well, that didn't work either. Just going to try it one quick time here where I help it slightly. Ooh, that sounded better. Hey, look at that. You could hear it decompressing, and you can tell when the valve's starting to close at the right time. We started ending up with some actual compression and load on there. Still no smoke out of the engine though, but it's sounding better. So every diesel engine needs three things to run. It needs oxygen getting into the cylinder. We've seen the intake valve going down, so we're assuming that there is enough oxygen getting in there to allow us to run. It needs enough compression to heat that air so that when we inject the diesel fuel in, it's hot enough to burn the said diesel fuel. So we heard that there's some compression. We don't know if there's enough compression yet, but we're going to assume there is. And the third thing we need is diesel fuel injected into the cylinder at the right time and at the right pressure to atomize it finally enough that it actually burns and the engine runs. So, going from simplest to easiest, let's see if this thing's injecting some fuel. Give it a little crank and see what happens. So we are injecting fuel. Now I'm thinking what we should do is, there's no smoke coming out of this exhaust pipe, and that valve cover was popping up and down pretty good as it ran. I'm just going to throw my hand over the exhaust here and just kind of feel how much force is being pushed. There is next to nothing for exhaust pressure force coming out of here. So I'm thinking we've got a ring or a valve problem going on. So the air cleaner isn't all that bad. A little dirty. Ooh. Look at the inside of that air cleaner. I don't know if you can see the dirt that's on the inside of that air cleaner. That's not so good. I don't know if that's showing up so well on the camera, but it is full of dirt. Full of dirt. So when you hear the term an engine has been dusted, what that means is air entering the air filter has either the filters failed and allowed dirt to go inside and have unfiltered air enter into the engine, which is going to cause like a lapping compound inside the cylinder bore. You're going to have dirt sticking to the cylinder walls. The rings are going to ride over top of them, and it just basically grinds your cylinder away, wrecks your rings, and the only real way to fix it is an engine overhaul. So I'm not too sure why this engine's dusted. It looks like this filter's been in there a while. It doesn't look like it's failed. Seems to seal okay on the cap and seal okay there. But the only thing is when I stick it in there, if I look at where this, we'll just say an air filter retaining screw, where it bottoms out here, if we look at the distance of that lip, from here to here is actually, it's not flush, but it's very close to being flush. So I'm thinking this thing's had the wrong air filter in it. Hopefully you can see that. That's how much short the air filter is. And it almost looks like it might be close to sealing, but any restriction on that filter and we suddenly have air, unfiltered air entering our engine. So tell you what, you run to the fridge, grab another wobbly pop and a snack. I'll rip this head off and we'll have a look inside at this engine and see how much damage is done inside. Check you out in a bit. Oh, there's no hole in the piston, that's good. Hopefully that's some pictures for you. So far I've been pretty impressed with how this little engine is manufactured, except for the muffler. I didn't like the way they did the muffler one bit. Just grabbing onto the cylinder, zero force. The weight of this little cylinder, that's literally all I've got. So there's zero amount of ring tension on it. Now I'm going to try to get well, maybe that's okay. You probably might be able to see that. See how shiny? It's like chromed. That is a lot of dirt. Well, maybe not a lot of dirt, but definitely dirt went through her. Let's clean it up and get a better picture. This cylinder is untouched. All I did was wash it in a little Varsol and give it a quick go down with the brake clean there. Hopefully you'll be able to see in there. It doesn't look like chrome anymore. It actually is pitted and almost looks rusty and sandblasted. If I flip the cylinder over, hopefully you can see this. This section here, beautiful, nice crosshatch in it. Factory new. If I turn it around, kind of goes all the way around except for right here. Should be able to see just a little coloring change. It gets a little shiny in there and smoother. The crosshatch is basically gone. That's a piston skirt on the major thrust side coming down, and it's just worn the crosshatch off. So if this engine had not been dusted, that's the way our cylinder would look up at the top. Definitely time for a deglaze and a re-ring. If I shine my light a little further down where the rings were running, you can see it is different color, and it looks like it's sandblasted or bead blasted very finely. Nice smooth fine finish, way smoother than the crosshatch section. It's very, very smooth, and that would be our problem for our loss of compression and no run. So with no crosshatch, there's nothing to hold any oil, and what seals our compression and our combustion gases are the oil sitting in the crosshatch, making that oil seal between the ring and the cylinder. So here, no oil, no seal. All the air blows into the crankcase. So this engine is officially pooched. I took the piston off as well. I didn't like the way the piston felt on the connecting rod. It rocked back and forth this way a little bit too much. I have no idea what the spec is. I'm just going off of my previous zero diesel single cylinder experience I have. Quick looking at the piston. The pin bores, kind of a glazed, dull look. Super shiny in there. We'll see if the light shows it up a little bit better. Hopefully you can see it's nice and shiny in the pin bore there. And then this way here, it looks more like gray spray paint, like primer, not shiny at all. So there's some wear in the pin bores. It felt pretty good, but I'll get my dial bore gauge and check that out. Make sure it's okay. You can see on the skirt, they're rubbing on the skirt. This is just a friction coating on there. I'm not too worried about that too much. The other side, major thrust side, a lot more of the material is worn. The machining marks on the skirt are pretty smooth. Might have some life left in it. And looking at the crown of the piston, carbon, cleaned, carbon, cleaned. I have not done anything with this piston. So that's why it came out of the engine other than the oil's removed and it's been brake cleaned. So this is telling me that this piston has been rubbing on the crown of the piston has been rubbing on the cylinder as it's been running. So we got a little bit of piston slap going on in there, which is probably going to tell me that cylinder is quite a bit oversized. We'll grab the dial bore gauge and just confirm that. Before I go grab the bore gauge, there's the piston pin or the wrist pin. I know you can't see this or feel this, but I think this is where most of my piston rock is. I've actually never had a diesel piston pin with this much wear in it before. Unless, of course, there's been a lack of lube, but it's almost like the pin is a little bit too soft. We'll measure that up and see. I just set my dial bore gauge up to the new part of the cylinder, or the unworn section of the cylinder. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I'm about 2/10 under. About 2/10 out of round on the unworn section. So I've set it at the 0 at the largest point. I'm just going to drop down into the lower ring area, and that's already 2 6/10 over size. Drop her down a little further into the bore. 5-hole foul, and up near where it's the worst. One wrap. Doesn't even touch her. I can just feel it starting to want to touch. So 9.5 thou. 8 thou of taper, 9.5 thou oversize on that bore. I think it might be a little bit worn out. Now my little dial bore gauge doesn't go down small enough to measure this 30mm pin bore, so I'm going to do this with some telescopic gauges. Not really the best way to do it, but this is all I have at the moment. So this is what I'm going to use. So I don't know what the clearance on this wrist pin is supposed to be to the piston bore on this little engine. I'm going to have to find some specs for it. But it seems to be round, and I'm not sure what size this pin's supposed to be. But there seems to be, I would guess, too much pin slop between the pin and the piston. We're almost 3.5 thou, which is quite a bit, I would think, for this little engine. I can just feel, you might be able to hear that too. So I'd say the pins wore out, the pistons wore out, the cylinders wore out. And while you guys were gone, I actually did some phone calls, and I haven't done much shopping around. I only called one place and they want almost $7 grand for this engine. So I'm not too sure. Parts are incredibly expensive as well. Just the parts alone are a couple grand. So I'm not too sure if we're going to be rebuilding this engine or not. It might be a patch job. It might be a repower. We'll see how it goes. But that'll be a time for another video maybe if somebody's interested in it. And that's it for now. Thanks for watching.